Hello, hello. This is not Liz. Um, she will be joining us in just a minute. Apparently, traffic is terrible. Sorry, I'm sorry, Liz, for the jokes. Yeah. So anyway, we will give everybody a moment to come in the room. Please say hello. Hey, let us know where you're from. What's up, Stephanie, our friend in Nice, France? I hope you are well and staying French. It's a weird thing to say, but why not? But yes, please say hello. Let us know you're here, and hopefully Liz will be here shortly. If not, I have no problem taking over this myself. And really, do we really need Liz? I mean, that's just something. I don't. That's not a yes or no question. It really is just something to ponder. But please say hello. Let us know you're here and where you're from, and we will get started momentarily. Is it Bridier? Bridiet from Mass. And we have Noah in Oakland, California. What's up, Noah? How are you? Hope everyone is doing great. Oh, she's here.
I'm sorry.
Turn on your... Oh, so it is Bridier. Very pretty. I don't know that. I've never heard that name. Hi, Renee. Okay, so Liz is here now, so it's not just us. Hi, Liz. Welcome to your stream.
Hi, thank you for having me on my stream that I'm late for. I'm sorry. How are you, Ethan?
I'm doing great. We're just killing time. I'm tap dancing. We're just getting things done, waiting for you. So we are ready to roll.
I am here. Okay, awesome. So thank you so much for joining. As always, everybody who's here, I know Ethan's already been engaging you guys, so thanks for letting us know where you're from, who you are, and we hope that you will stay active the entire time today. Our goal is to make this as interactive as possible because really we actually don't have a set agenda. This is one of the first times that we are not here to talk about a specific subject or to talk about something that we had in mind, but really instead to talk about advocacy and to talk about stigma and to talk about how we can engage and how we can appropriately support our community. As many of you know, we had this scheduled for 2 weeks ago and we canceled it due to everything that was going on with the horrific violence of people of color that was happening in America. And our decision to do that was twofold. The first was that we wanted to show our support, stand in solidarity, and to really make sure that the community knows that we hear them, we see them, and we support them. And the second was that it felt very insensitive. It felt very insensitive for us to come on and talk about non-racial related topics. And I think, frankly, candidly, it still kind of does. And I just want to be honest and open about that. I think that for us to just go back to scheduled programming and pretend like there's not so many other things going on right now in America that we need to make sure we're addressing and that we need to make sure we're giving space for those of you suffering and struggling to process. That's just critical for us. And I know nothing we can say, nothing we can do that's going to get rid of the pain right now. But what I know both myself and Ethan can say and can stand in solidarity on is the fact that we are committed to making tomorrow better for those of color. When it comes to OCD treatment, when it comes to mental health treatment, when it comes to access to care, and when it comes to support and listening. I struggled a lot at the beginning with what do I say? Am I going to say the right thing? Am I going to say the wrong thing? And what I've learned is that it's about saying something. It's about being present, and it's about recognizing that there are injustices all around us, and it's time that we no longer turn our shoulder. And so we are here, we're listening, and I hope that the community knows that and feels that. And if you have any suggestions for things that we can do to further reinforce that or to more support your community, please make sure you let us know at Peace of Mind and at the International OCD Foundation, because we are committed to making tomorrow better than today and certainly better than yesterday. Ethan, your thoughts?
Oh, I think that was beautifully said.
Thank you. It's real, right? It's how we feel. And yeah, it's heavy. And I think that it's something that, and I think there's so many things that we can learn, and I'm learning every single day of things that I've done wrong, things that I need to improve on, biases, inherent biases that I live with. And I think the more we can be willing to sit here and say that we have room for growth, that we have faults, I think the better we can serve the community that needs us the most. So
Absolutely. I mean, I wasn't deflecting. I was like, I made a statement a couple weeks ago about my thoughts and feelings, and I kind of stand by what I said, which I gave a lot of thought to. It is real, and I don't think that Liz, it's not lost on either Liz or I that we're two white faces here joining you today. And I've definitely done a lot of reflecting as well, and what it means, and we don't tolerate racial injustice and police brutality, and want to take a proactive approach in being anti-racist and recognize our own white privilege and do what we can. And so I think it's all been a time of reflection and standing in solidarity with all people of color, Blacks especially right now, but all people of color facing stigmas that neither Liz and I have ever faced or had to even think about in many ways, just by being white. So I think all of that is absolutely true and relevant, and getting used to the conversation and making sure it's priority, and echoing everything that Liz said. So I wholeheartedly agree, and be a collaborator, be collaborators with everybody, and definitely let that, if you are a person of color, you are Black, whatever, we're not turning to you to carry the load. We want to carry it with you. And so, we may need help to identify our own, but we're with you in solidarity, and point us in the direction, and we're there. And once we learn, we can take over. So that's kind of how I feel about it all.
Yeah. And I also think that, what Ethan just said is critical, is that we want to help carry the load, and we know we can't carry it all. But what we also know is that sometimes when we think we're carrying the load, or when we think that we're on the right path, we might be totally on the wrong road to begin with, right? And sometimes what we think might make sense, or what we think might be helpful, might not be what the community wants at all, but instead there's something they want that we just aren't even aware of. And I want to be candid about that. I think that the more we can speak out about what would be helpful and what would be needed, that's where we'll be able to really make the change and be committed to being able to do that. So, Ethan, I think that's a perfect opportunity for us to jump into, the side topic of today, which is that OCD is not an adjective. And a lot of people might wonder where that saying came from. And my sister gets all the credit, so she will want it. So we'll make sure we'll give it to her. But, it really came from the frustration that I felt often when I feel most unheard, it tends to be when people make light of a serious thing, right? And this is what we're talking about, that people experience, is that I feel like people are ignoring me. I feel like people aren't seeing my pain. And then when they do, they dismiss it, or they say something that doesn't relate to it. And for OCD, there's nothing to me more than that, than when people use it as an adjective, right? As this great quirk or quality that you wish your coworker had or your friend had, right? When people will say, oh, you should see my coworker's desk, she's so OCD, or you should see my fiance's closet, he's so OCD. And for those of us that live with OCD, it's hurtful. It feels like you are invalidating the illness and the pain that we have to live with, because we live with obsessive compulsive disorder. We live with OCD. It's not some quirk that you wish you had. It's not some fun quality that makes us more organized. It's a serious, debilitating illness. And I think both of us, Ethan and myself, that's probably why we chose to do what we do, is because we wanted to use our voice and our pain to make change. My saying I always talk about is turning pain into purpose, right? And being able to take the pain that we've dealt with and do something good with it, and have a purpose for how we can positively impact people in their lives from our suffering. And I know there's so many people that do the exact same thing, and I think that's really important, is that Ethan and I may have opportunities to share on behalf of the foundation or on behalf of different organizations, but everybody is an advocate in their own right, doing their own thing and doing advocacy in their own community and with their own people. And to me, it doesn't matter if you advocate to one person or 1,000. If you can make an impact in one person's life, it's worth it. And I'd be curious, Ethan, to hear a little bit about your path to advocacy and what it looked like and what it took and why you chose it.
It's a great question. I think that my mom will tell you, and I honestly don't remember, but I was in the crux of a really tumultuous and really horrible time in my OCD, and I don't remember that. I remember I was laying in my mother's lap, and like I was so convinced of whatever the OCD fear symptom was at the time, and she was sort of had my head between her legs and was just not on her lap. My head was on my mother's lap. Anyway, moving forward, my head was on her lap. And that's the end of our show. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm glad we can make really anyway. So she was rocking back and forth trying to comfort me, and I was completely just devastated. And I remember pausing in the moment of my sort of OCD and looking up, and I'm like, Mom, I know that this OCD is going to kill me and I'm going to die, but you know, if I didn't, I want to give back and I want to help, and I want to be able to, you know, show people that they're not alone. And so I think it was inherently always in me that I wanted to give back to some degree, although I don't think I ever thought that would be a possibility. I thought that OCD would really rule my life for the rest of my life and dictate all my actions, and I honestly did believe it was going to kill me. I didn't know how, but I just believed that at some point I was going to die from the OCD. So when I got better and entered this phase of management and maintenance from OCD, there was really not even a decision. It was like, this is something I have to do. I have to do this. And what's interesting is that it was, as Liz said, turning my pain into my purpose, but it really came from, boiled down, this desire to not see anybody go through what I went through. That was it. It's that simple. I didn't want anybody to have to go 30 years suffering with OCD, not knowing why. I didn't want anybody to have to be stigmatized by friends and coworkers and people they looked up for, being told to just get it together. If I told you how much, thank you, Liz. I'm glad you love the mix of humor. That humor was not intentional. Most of my jokes are. That was not. Just saying that on video. Anyway, so but we do try to mix in humor for sure. Just not that joke. But seriously, it really came from a place of why did I suffer as long as I did? Why did it take me 17 years from diagnosis to treatment? Why, when I was a kid, that they didn't know what was going on? Why did I get told to get my SHIT together or pull up? I can't tell you how many times people said, pull up your bootstraps, just get it together, just do it. I remember a boss of mine one time said I was really struggling, and she kind of knew what was up. And I'll never forget, I said to her, I'm trying. And she's like, she put a pen on the table. It's not a pen, but she put a pen on the table and goes, try to pick up the pen. You can't, right? You just have to pick up the pen. Stop trying. And she like had all these, you know, analogies, and it was just really, really, really upsetting. And so facing years of stigma, facing years of uncertainty and not knowing what was happening and feeling crazy, I knew that I had gone through this for a reason. It was very clear in my mind, and that I had to speak up, and I had to speak as loudly as possible. And there was no doubt or no question. And to this day, although many passions of mine have changed and many things have morphed into other things, the one thing that has remained 1000% true in my heart is the desire and need to advocate and change the message and play a small role and follow in Liz's footsteps and play a small role in changing the narrative. That's why I do what I do.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's interesting because I always wonder, like, one of the things I hear all the time is like, but what if people don't respond well? You know, what if when we tell our story, people are rude or people are negative or we get backlash? And I'm curious what your experience has been like with that, and I'll share mine briefly. But, you know, there's always a few people that don't react the way we want, or may not be able to provide the support for whatever reason the way I need them to. But what I have found is overwhelmingly, people are so much more respectful, empathetic, caring than I even ever expected them to be. And what I find is that sharing my story, while it's vulnerable, while it's difficult, as you just mentioned, it opens up the narrative for people to share theirs and for people to be at a place where their guard is down and they're willing to say, oh my gosh, like my child lives with this, or I live with this, or can you help my brother? And, you know, I've always said, and I mean it when I say it, is that if my story helped one person, then it was worth it. And it was worth the anxiety that it took for me to be open about it. I'm curious for you, Ethan, like, what have you heard, or personally, what was it like for you as far as how people responded? And was there anxiety at first around that? Because like once it's out there, it is out there, right? And we can't really take that away.
It is. To answer your first question, I've had the exact same experience. I can count on the number of one hands. I can count on one hand the amount of people that have responded negatively or offensively to my story or my advocacy, and even then, I can't really remember who they are. 99.8% of my experiences with my advocacy and coming out with my story have been incredibly positive within the community, outside of the community. And Liz is right. It opens up a dialogue. It opens up a conversation. Things that come to mind immediately is being on a plane. Every time I travel, if I travel, I'm going to, people ask, what do you do? Whether I'm going to a conference or not, what do you do? And I tell them produce, write, but I also advocate for mental health. Oh, really? What kind? OCD. And immediately it initiates either the cleaning stuff, and they don't mean it offensively. They're genuinely curious. Or they pause a moment and they go, well, actually, I struggle. Or they tell me about a family member or a friend that really struggles with OCD. And I've never had a bad instance where it's hurt. Now I will tell you that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. We talk about, if you know Thomas Smalley and his advocacy, by him coming out, he got directly bullied by a coach in his college. So it's not a straight line for everybody. But he will tell you that the place that he's in now with his own advocacy, is because of the hardships and the paths that he's took. And so really, they're all growth opportunities. But I've had the same experience as Liz, nothing but positivity, advocacy. In terms of coming out with the story, I feel like I had a slightly unique experience, and I could be wrong. I never really questioned, just being honest, I never questioned once the idea of coming out big and bold and massively and showing footage of me sick. And I just really didn't care. I was just so angry that I had lost chunks of my life to OCD. I was so frustrated that people were going through the same thing. And it felt, and quite frankly, and this might sound selfish, it was some of the only way I could make sense of the first 30 years of my life. Was like, if I don't do this, then it was all wasted. So like, I really didn't have any pause whatsoever in coming out in a big way. What I will say is people around me had pause. My family, my friends, like, well, maybe you shouldn't say that. Well, definitely don't talk about the time you were in a psychiatric facility. And I kept saying, but if I don't talk about it, who is? Who's going to talk about it? Like, somebody has to talk about it. And so that's just my own personal journey. It's different for everybody, but I kind of was like, out of the gate, like, I got to change the narrative. Even if it's one person, I have to make a difference. And who can I turn to, and how can I get involved, and what can I do? And, I was a man on a mission then. I'm a man on a mission now. I've met some incredible people, and, my life is so much more full and complete because of it.
I love it. And I think that, what I think we can all relate to is, if I'm not going to tell my story, who is, and I know when I was first diagnosed, my parents had a lot of people saying, like, you guys should just get Liz treatment and then kind of like not talk about it so much. And my dad's response was like, for what? So we can continue the stigma and continue pretending like it's something we should be ashamed of. And, I know that not everybody has that same feedback, and that not everybody has parents or support that can allow them to be open and talk about it, whether it's your work environment or different things. And what I always say is start slowly. So when you talk about advocacy, the first question I always get is, how do I become an advocate? How do I do the work? And my response is always like, slowly start to tell your story. As much as a lot of people might say, like, well, how do I get on a national show, or how do I do this or that? I actually don't recommend that that's where you start anyway. Because once you get on a national show and you're talking really openly to the public at that scale, you have to be ready for the response, but you also have to know how to share your narrative. And I wonder, Ethan, if we could talk a little bit about that, and I'll put you on the spot, but I know that you and we could talk a little bit about the road trip we did. And I know for both of us, like, over the years of when we first started, the way we would talk about OCD and talk about treatment compared to where it is now, there's been a ton of learning. And it doesn't mean that early on when we spoke, it wasn't good or helpful or useful for people, but it's also about the way that it's not that there's a right or wrong way to share, but it is critical that we give hope, and I think that sometimes when we're talking about the depths and the difficulties in our stories, we may not always talk about treatment and talk about what it can look like. And sometimes it's just so critical that we're really clear about, my treatment is my treatment, right? It looks different than Ethan's treatment, who looks different than someone else's treatment. And that how do we tell our story, own it as our own, but then also relate to the general public versus also getting like too stuck in the weeds. And I know now I'm getting in the weeds of having us go this far into it, but what have you learned as an advocate on your level, Ethan, about how to tell your story, where to start, and then also what the messaging, like how to tailor the messaging so that it best meets your audience?
That's a great question. And I can say that I'm constantly learning and constantly retooling and constantly retailoring. I would say that, like, I love this question coming from Liz because I felt like I learned a lot from Liz on that road trip, for sure. We really got to, I got a lot of insight into my own story. And it's a great question. It did put me on the spot a little bit just because I'm trying to process. I think it's easy, as Liz said, the treatment is really important. It's easy to get bogged down into the details of your story in terms of the suffering and the struggling and the minutia of like what happened day to day. And while that's important, there's an arc to the story, right? And it is important for people to know where you came from. And because then that arc and that completion to like a beautiful life or management or maintenance, again, we always say we're not perfect, we still struggle, but it's important to know where you came from, to know the journey and where you are now. And so that's definitely important. Liz actually reminded me of one of the first talks in 2010. I went to the conference in DC. I was really sick, really struggling. It was an exposure. And I only went to a few talks. I spent most of the time in the hotel room. But one of the talks I went to was a personal story. And I don't remember who it was, but I remember him, whoever this was, talked, say it was an hour. For 55 minutes, he talked about all his compulsions and all his obsessions and all the things he went through. And the last 5 minutes he went, but then I got ERP and I'm better now. Thanks. And I was like, I suffer too. How did you wait? I was like, where did how did you get better? That's what I want to know. Where did it happen? How did it happen? So that definitely influenced my storytelling in terms of my own journey. But I think there are ways to stay true to who you are, to stay true to your story and your unique story at that, but also make sure you educate. Everybody's coming from a different place. So like for me, I definitely learned that there were aspects of my story that if I didn't explain it in a certain way, people could take incorrectly and it could actually be hurtful in some ways. And that was hard to hear, but then I had to process it. And like I would talk about it with Liz and we would talk about different ways and things. And really, I think as you speak as an advocate, your personal story shifts from the details of the pain and suffering to really those are sprinkled in with the where we are now and how we got here and how you can get better and why and all that stuff. So I think I danced around the question, but that's the best I can give you, Liz.
Yeah, but I love it, right? I think of what you said that meant the most to me during that, like what I heard, that one of my takeaways was, what it's like to be an observer, right? So when we speak, like, I don't think like I'm just being honest, I'm just speaking, right? Like I'm sharing from the heart. It's rare that like I'm planning what I'm going to say next. I might have like bullet points or a little bit of an outline, but for me, it's from the heart. It's my story. It's my journey. And what I've had to learn is, what does it feel like to be a listener of my journey, right? I know it, so I can like skip over treatment or skip over certain aspects because I know what it was like. But as Ethan mentioned, the audience might not, and they need more details on it because that's just not enough for them. And I think that I don't know, I guess for me, that's something that I've like that's one of the best advice that I can give and to learn is imagine what it's like for someone else to hear your story and what parts would they need to know more of, right? Or how could they understand that treatment's available, that help's available, that hope exists. And if not, because you're in the middle of your disorder and you're really struggling with OCD and you can't necessarily conceptualize that appropriately, my push would be is like, are you in the right spot to be an advocate at that point? And I do think that that's something that it's hard to talk about, but it is really important, right? Is that advocacy takes, you have to be in a place. And I think both Ethan and I have had ups and downs. And there's been times where we've had downs where we've actually had to like let people know in advance this isn't the right time for us and that we're taking care of ourselves and we shouldn't, like, we're not in a place to go talk and to pour for other people, like give and give, because we have to take care of ourselves. And I think that's really healthy. It's really hard, but it's healthy to do as well.
I just want to point out one thing on this track. I don't want to deviate too much, but I think you're also always processing your journey and gleaning new realizations about your process that also inform what your story becomes. So I'll give you an example. If you watch my keynote, I probably say a few times that ERP didn't work for me. And people refer to the keynote all the time. And that was my story, because for me, ACT was, and so I felt like a big fraud a lot of times, because I would talk about ERP and exposure response prevention, especially as I sort of joined the spokespeople and Liz and Jeff Bell and have these conversations. And I would kind of feel like, oh yeah, but that wasn't my own experience, but I still need to talk about it because I know it helps so many people. And one of the most profound moments in my own journey and my own storytelling was on the road trip, as Liz referred to, and Liz and I were talking about it. And Liz gave me some great insight, which was, we just kind of played with this idea of did ERP not work, or were you just not in a place to be able to receive and accept and buy into ERP and effectively utilize it? And after I processed that, I realized that she was absolutely right. I was not in a place at the time where I could properly dive into an exposure and then do response prevention without completely melting down. And so, I use ERP every day in my life, and it saves my life. And I use acceptance commitment therapy and all the different modalities of treatment. But it was in that moment that processing that with Liz, my story changed, because, and I talk about it all the time. I talk about it. I was in such a dark place that I really struggled to engage in ERP. And so here were the steps that I had to do that then I could effectively do treatment. Right. So that was a huge narrative shift in my own story, which you helped, craft, and I think was really beneficial, not only to me, but other people's to hear as well, because I know a lot of people struggle with ERP and may think, oh, this doesn't work, and it's important to make that. So yes.
Yeah. And I think, and I hear that all the time. And, whether it's with patients or colleagues or different individuals living with OCD, is like, I'll hear people say, well, ERP is not working right now for me, or it doesn't work anymore. And the more we actually unpack that, it's not that it's not working, it's that they're not ready, right? Like, or it's working slower, or it looks different, or, well, I'm not actually totally diving in, so I guess that's not why it's not working, right? We all recognize like why it might actually not be working and what we need to do to make it work better. And I think that's really critical and, just really important. So, okay, so let's hop in. We've got some questions, and I think they're really important questions because all of them are really kind of lumped together. And so I'm gonna kind of do that. I'm gonna put them into one, but it seems that a couple of the questions are focused on the pandemic and depression, right? So kind of what's happening, like, so the pandemic is really getting a hold of people. It's preventing people from being able to go back to work, but they know going back to work and being with friends is important, or seeing the kids that they work with would be critical. And really just talking a little bit about how, like, let's start there, of like just the pandemic and struggling through that. And also the fact that the pandemic kind of is a recipe for mental health to be worse, right? Especially depression, because we're kind of encouraging isolation and encouraging people to not engage in activities that we otherwise would typically engage in as behavioral activation. What are your thoughts, Ethan?
Many thoughts. I'm going to repeat some things that some brilliant people talked about. So last night we did a town hall, maybe some of you watched, on grief and loss. And we had Kim Quinlan and Dr. Dennis Turch on there. And there's a few things to recognize, which is, first, we're all grieving the loss of some essence of normalcy. And that's depressing, and on top of that, we're all experiencing something that is uncertain, that doesn't have a clear end date, or, and on top of that, we're all dealing with our own normal human being life issues on top of that. So there's all kinds of stuff compounded on top of all kinds of stuff. And so, as Liz said, that's a recipe that we don't necessarily like. But the good news is that although it can be really uncomfortable, and it's really uncomfortable, I definitely have multiple times during the day where I panic in my head. I'm just like, oh my God, what's going on? Why does this feel like a sci-fi movie? You hear things like, did you hear what happened in Texas? Do you hear what's going on in Seattle? It's like, it sounds literally like something you'd watch on sci-fi. But what I will tell you is, I think we're in a fortunate situation. If you've had exposure response prevention, if you've had other modalities of treatment that we've talked about, I think you have skills and tools to lean on in these uncertain times. And that's important. I also think that's what really helpful is not lowering, but changing your expectations about yourself and what you need or want in life. I think we're doing a lot of grieving around what we're losing for the future. So it could be something immediate, like a wedding or a graduation, or if you were a senior this year or whatever. But it could be something less immediate, like I don't know when I'm going to be able to travel again, or my job. There's all of these things that we kind of have all this uncertainty around. But it's a really good opportunity, and this, I'm in no way saying you should honor those feelings. You should, they're all valid, but at the same time, it's a good opportunity to look toward what we have to be grateful for. And I know that sounds cliche, but this is a fantastic opportunity to turn toward the little things in your life: family, friends, love, nature, and they may seem tiny, but turning back to the basics right now can be a really effective way to sort of move through this process. Liz, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think 100%. I think that everything that you just said is critical. And I think that we have to be creative, right? So when we talk about one of the skills we use for depression, it's called behavioral activation. And the point of BA is changing things up, right? If we stay isolated in our room and we are dealing with our thoughts, so we're just isolating and sitting with them, guess what? The thoughts are going to get worse. They're going to have a bigger hold on us, and it's going to be hard for us to detach and move on. However, we can engage in what we call behavioral activation. So what are some simple things that we can do to change things up, to activate, right, behavior? For some people, it might be playing ping pong or going on a walk or bouncing a basketball. For some of us, it's listening to music, making up a new dance, or talking to a friend, FaceTiming with a friend. And the reality is that our previous BA, right, maybe it was going to a restaurant or going to the mall or whatever, maybe it's been taken away from you, right? There's no doubt that right now, things that we used to do that were kind of our escape may not be there, may not be as accessible or safe. But it doesn't mean we can't find other things, right? And that might not replace it. It might make us actually value those old things even more and be excited for when we can return to them. But there's still substitutes, and we can still make those substitutes beautiful. We can still make those substitutes work and make them be something that helps get us out of the anxiety, the depression, and the thoughts. And, I'm hearing a lot of people talk about, but the pandemic has a hold of me. It feels paralyzing. And I want to say that, like, we have to set goals for ourselves that are achievable and obtainable and work to meet them even in the middle of this crisis. So we have to keep our eyes on what we're working for and think about a plan to come up with it. But then at the same time, I want to say, like, it's also okay to be struggling right now. People with or without OCD are struggling. There's uncertainty all around us. I know here in Texas, we felt like, okay, we're getting a little bit better. Like, we're ready to slowly reopen stuff. And then we had a huge spike yesterday in cases, and it's like, whoa, what's happening? And it's anxiety provoking, and we're trying to figure it out. And so my point is that the pandemic is anxiety provoking for everyone, OCD or not. All of the new rules, the guidelines, the uncertainty around them, it's triggering for most people, OCD or not. So it's also okay to be struggling and to feel those feelings, to feel the emotions of struggle, of pain, but then to say, okay, and so what can I do about them? What do I have control over right now? We don't have control over the pandemic. We don't have control over when COVID is going to be gone, but we do have control over how we react in the moment and what we can do to change our mental health, to change our state of mind when it needs to be shifted.
Yeah, that's a great point, Liz. And I also think that this is not an all or nothing situation. I think that this is an opportunity to exist simultaneously with a variety of feelings. So if you're changing your behavioral activation during the day to some similar things, that doesn't mean that you're not allowed to miss the things that you did before. That doesn't mean that these things should now be a replacement. You can still mourn the things that you've lost temporarily and dive into the things that you have in front of you. I think that the reality of the current environment is that we just have to do our best to accept the new norm as being uncomfortable, and being comfortable being uncomfortable. And we say that a lot, or, it's okay to not be okay, or we have to be okay not being okay. We use that in treatment all the time and talk about it all the time. And in reality, that's our current world right now, is like, there's a lot of discomfort out there. And all we can do is sort of ride that wave along with it, honor those feelings, let those feelings be there, engage in behavioral activation, as Liz said. with whatever those things are, but still be allowed to feel. Nobody's saying we can't feel or be scared or be depressed or be sad, but we still want to act. We still want to move. We still want to move our bodies and things like that. And try to stay as present as we possibly can, because I can tell you that worrying about what may or may not be in the future is a depressing rabbit hole that we all go through. I do it. Everybody does it. But being mindful in this moment is a really helpful practice.
And that leads to some of the next questions, Ethan, that individuals have been asking, and I'll combine a couple together. But what advice do you give yourself when you're at your worst point? And then also the second question of, I don't understand how I can go from being okay one day and totally struggling the next. And why does OCD make you believe something you didn't believe yesterday, right? So like, why can triggers come all of a sudden? And what advice do you give yourself when you're in that moment and really struggling?
Yeah, I saw, I'll actually answer the second first, if you don't mind. And then Liz, I want you to answer the first, because I know who asked the first question and we spoke to. So I'm curious to your opinion. I think it's interesting. I think there's a behavioral and scientific explanation as to why OCD, and probably Liz could speak better to that, as to why OCD there's a trigger 1 minute and why the next. I'm not going to give you that answer. I'm going to give you the more behavioral sort of ACT answer, which is, I think the best thing we can do in these moments is not look for the why. The why is simple. We have OCD. That's the why. The why is because OCD behaves in a manner that some days it's there, some days it's not. Some days it's triggered, some days it's not. Some days it's stress, some days it's an actual trigger or something we watch on the news, something maybe we triggered ourselves in an ERP, maybe it's just something that happens, somebody said something on the phone, whatever. I'm not diminishing, but all I'm saying is that is the nature of OCD. And I've always said this, is that sometimes, and I relate to that feeling, I've always said that like OCD feels like a marathon. And by the time you run the 26.5 miles or whatever it is, clearly I've run many, I know exactly how many miles it is. You run the 26 miles, you feel like I'm so far away from OCD. But then you turn around and it's right there waving at you. It's like, whoa, I just ran away from it. It's so strange how one day you can feel so distanced from it and have all this insight into your life and all this objectivity. But then the next day it's right in your face and you've lost all that insight. But I would encourage to not explore the why every time. The why is because it's OCD. I would encourage to explore how can I react to the OCD? How can I respond to the OCD? What can I focus on, and how can I behave in response to that? That's my 2 cents on that.
Couldn't agree more. And I think that, what Ethan said, I gave a presentation this afternoon, and one of my points is that one of the common characteristics of OCD is that it waxes and wanes, right? We know that we can be feeling great and then have one trigger and all of a sudden it totally derails us, where yesterday that same trigger thought wouldn't have bothered us. And the why isn't really that relevant. Instead, it's, okay, this is the fact. How do I address it, right? And we know that treatment stays the same. And I will say, to the other question, which is, what was kind of most useful when we were struggling the most, and what advice would you give yourself? It's interesting because when I was in the moment, I don't think I gave myself helpful advice. I think that back then I was just learning treatment. I was just trying to figure things out. And even now, when I am extremely triggered and in my toughest spots, I mean, Ethan had some calls from me this Christmas when I was really struggling over the holidays. My insight isn't good. Right? That's part of struggling, is that when you're in the middle of a struggle, in the middle of a trigger, it's really hard to have really good insight and to be able to give yourself healthy, appropriate advice, which is why we often spiral, right? Because we're catastrophizing and things are getting worse and we're going down this kind of rabbit hole. And so for me, the best advice I can give myself is to slow down and call my therapist. And I know that might sound cliche, but it's true for me, because if I can just have even one quick session to just kind of recalibrate, right? To be able to say, okay, Liz, let's identify OCD. Let's identify some ERP and a good treatment plan. How are we going to get there? What are we going to do? What are your first steps? Set some goals, or do it on my own. That's really the best advice I can give myself, is slow down, come up with a plan of how you're going to address it, and give yourself grace. I think the biggest mistake I make when I'm struggling the most is how hard I am on myself. Like my self-compassion is out the window, and immediately it's why, why do I have OCD? Why am I struggling so bad? Why can't I deal with this? And versus all of the successes I'm having and all of the places where even if it's one success, that's huge, right? And so I think slowing down, giving yourself self-compassion and grace, and identifying how to address it. The thing I always tell my patients is that ritualizing isn't failing. Ritualizing is information gathering, and it allows you to have information about goals that you need to set to get better, right? If every time I do a ritual, I look at it as black and white as I've failed and now my treatment doesn't work and I can't gain control over my OCD, like what? Like how is that helpful or how is that healthy? But instead, when I'm ritualizing, if I look at it as like, oh, this is information for me that like this is where I'm struggling more right now, or these are things that I need to set active exposures around. Now I can use that information for good versus using it to tear myself down.
And I'll just add one thing, which is because I know who asked that question and why, and I have a little insight into her. I will also say to you, young lady, that if you don't currently have a therapist, hypothetically speaking, if you don't currently have a therapist, but you have had therapy in the past or have been to residential, I would possibly suggest what would have my therapist have said to me in that moment. Turn back to your skills and tools. That toolkit and tool belt, even no matter how far away that feels, no matter how far away that program felt, you always have that toolkit at your disposal. You just have to open it and reach into it and lean on it. And so those skills and tools are always there. And it's important to grab those and sort of put yourself back in that place of, if I were back with a therapist and I was dealing with this particular thing, what would that person say to me in this moment?
Yeah.
Sometimes go ahead.
I was just going to say, and that's what I think makes OCD treatment so amazing, is that our OCD might shift, our rituals might change, our intrusive thoughts might change, but homework doesn't, treatment doesn't, our skills don't. And it's kind of like riding a bike. Like once you've learned it and you have those skills, yes, they're hard to engage in on your own. Yes, sometimes you need extra support. Yes, they look different than for scrupulosity, than for contamination or for harm OCD or whatever. But the tools are the same. ERP is the same. And that toolkit is something that you get to keep forever. You own it. And I know for me, the best advice I ever got, and I guess this would be the answer to that question earlier, was, Liz, my provider said, Liz, you can trust me and you can be willing to do any ERP I tell you to do, and we can have a great relationship. But at the end of the day, you have to become your own provider. You have to be able to do your own treatment, because I don't live with you. I'm not going to be there in every time you struggle or travel with you when you have a trigger. And that is what treatment's all about. It's about us taking these tools that are available, learning how to apply them in our life, and committing to them forever. And not necessarily always being perfect at them, right? We're going to have slip ups, we're going to have rituals, but how, when we're struggling, can we pull them out and use them because we own them, no one else? And that's how I'll kind of wrap up today is ERP is there, and ERP doesn't change. And ERP is a tool that once you have, you get to own it. Whether it's ACT, ERP, behavioral activation, self-compassion, right? These are skills that we get to own and keep for the rest of our life, that so many others will wish they were introduced to. They will wish that they had the opportunity to use and that they could also access them. And so what I want to encourage us is look at the benefits that leaning into uncertainty has, especially in a time like this. Look at the ways that we can use it all around us and encourage other people to do the same. And give yourself grace. If you're struggling right now because the pandemic, things feel overwhelming, that's okay. You don't have to be perfect. We don't have to not be struggling. But it is critical that we don't let treatment fall to the side, and that we don't allow this to be an opportunity to take total hold of us and our OCD. And so I want to encourage you, lean into your tools, keep using them. And if you're considering advocacy, start small, but start somewhere. It doesn't matter if you start by educating a teacher or talking to a family member. Any opportunity for us to educate and to share is an opportunity for us to spread the message and give other people hope that they often need. Ethan?
That was beautiful. Honestly, I don't know. Yes, I agree.
Well, thank you. Well, we love seeing everybody You guys are amazing. We are truly inspired by every one of you, and it's why we do the work that we do. This is our final Re-Engage series for the Peace of Mind Foundation. And the point of this series was for us to slowly talk about ways we would get back into life and that we would start re-engaging after COVID-19. Unfortunately, COVID-19 is not over. We are still very much in the middle of it, especially in certain cities like my own. But the reality is that we can still start to re-engage in life and make sure that OCD doesn't take control. So we encourage you to do that. Ethan, as always, I'm admired by you. I appreciate your work, and I know that the community is so extremely grateful to have you.
Thank you, Liz. The feeling is mutual. I was about to say I wouldn't be where I am without you. So I just walk in your heels.
Well, not wearing heels today.
I'm just saying, those are the footsteps that you left. They're heels. They're not regular shoes. Just letting you know.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. We love you, and we will see you soon. Please reach out to peaceofmind.com or iocdf.org for more questions.